Today I would like to welcome Dean Bragonier, the founder and executive dyslexic of Noticeability. Noticeability is a nonprofit dedicated to developing a dyslexic-specific middle school curriculum. The mission is to unlock the potential of the dyslexic mind. This past summer, Dean was also the first person to swim around the island of Martha's Vineyard in order to raise funds for Noticeability. Dean, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So what kind of student were you in school?
I think probably in the very beginning, I was a very confused student. I remember that the early stages of school, kindergarten, first grade, everything was terrific. I was enjoying myself tremendously. And then reading was introduced. And I had this cold sweat moment, this wake-up call that the world, as I thought I knew it, had suddenly changed. And in a moment, I found myself kind of on the outside and scared, to be honest with you. I think that eventually I was able to be diagnosed as dyslexic, and with that came a knowledge as to why it was that things were more difficult for me than others. And I think that I was kind of motivated by people's low expectations of me. I kind of wanted to show them how wrong they would be. And as I went through high school, I really became a bulldog, I suppose. I would come home from school at 5 p.m. every night, and I would work till midnight, including Sundays. That was my routine, and I was just going to do it all. Eventually got into a very good college, one that I attribute for a large part of my worldview, which is called Bates College. And at Bates, all of a sudden, the innovative outside-the-box thinker was the most coveted mind you could have. So I got to Bates, and I thought, oh, well, all right. I wish I had known this was going to be the outcome. I wouldn't have been so discouraged early on.
Did you find at a certain age you connected with your teachers about your education? So yeah, I guess I read that right. Sorry. At what age do you think you found a connection with your teachers about your education?
I remember a couple of key teachers in elementary and high school that were able to present information in a way that was engaging. I think it was when I got to Bates that I found a love of learning, because I was able to study whatever it was that interested me. And I had always kind of toiled with the big questions of life. So I decided to study philosophy of religion and focused on Buddhist theory. And all of a sudden, for the first time, school resonated. It had meaning. It had, I was able to cultivate an interest in the process. And I'd say, unfortunately, it wasn't probably until college that I really connected with education, which unfortunately is pretty late in the game.
What are your thoughts on the terms of learning differences versus learning disabilities?
Yeah, I think that when you take a historical perspective of the printed word as the primary medium of teaching, you realize that the school system has adopted a very narrow perspective on how to teach students. For those with dyslexia, we have a difficult time reading. And so if you want to call my situation as having a disability, I've got a reading disability. I don't have a learning disability. But that's if we insist upon using the word disability, and I think that probably the most appropriate use of the word disability comes to the schools. If schools insist on only a single conduit, being the printed word, as the method for teaching, then I think they're the ones that are kind of expressing a lack of ingenuity. So I'd almost say it's the schools that have a teaching disability. I don't know. Try that one out for size. That's actually I'm not the only. There have been others who have spoken to that, and I'm tearing a page from their books as well.
I agree with you on that one.
Thank you.
What inspired you to become an advocate for students with dyslexia?
I think, Quinn, that's twofold. The first is that as I got older and I entered the workforce and became an entrepreneur, I realized that my dyslexia was the principal reason I was able to succeed. And I thought, this is a messed up paradigm if we don't expose individuals to the positive aspect of dyslexia until they've gotten out of school, because we lose a lot of dyslexics on the way. But I think that the reason behind my outspoken nature and what I'm doing today is in large part due to my 8-year-old dyslexic son. My wife is dyslexic, I'm dyslexic, and I look at my son and he's happy and inquisitive and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I don't want him to go through the same system that I went through. So we got to be the change we want to see, right?
Exactly. Can you describe what noticeability offers to students and educators?
Absolutely, and this is going to be a challenge for me to be short-winded on this one, but as I just mentioned, I got out of college and then only realized after 16 years of education what was valuable in terms of my dyslexic perspective. And there's a book that many of us have read in this field in particular called The Dyslexic Advantage. And The Dyslexic Advantage actually introduced a neurologically based argument as to why dyslexia carries with it certain cognitive attributes. And what the book does is it actually goes one step further and says not only are these cognitive attributes, but these attributes translate into success in certain vocational categories. And those top 4 happen to be entrepreneurship, engineering, architecture, and the arts. And so I thought to myself, what if we could engage a population that is very traditionally disenfranchised by the way things are being taught, introduce them to those pre-professional pathways, and while we've got these young, aspiring, disengaged minds, we can show them for the first time in their lives what makes their brains so valuable to society, and if they can see what makes their mind so valuable, then what we can do is we can start to blend in the tools that they need, not only to succeed in school, but to succeed in life. And so a very, very complicated way of saying what we do, or perhaps a simplistic way, I don't know, is that we take those vocations, those professional outcomes for most successful dyslexics, and we distill it to a middle school level, and we embed it with executive functioning methodology and social emotional learning so that individuals with dyslexia can change the narrative from one of deficiency-based to strength-based.
So this past summer, you swam around Martha's Vineyard to help raise awareness for your fund. What was that like for you, and what did you learn from it?
First of all, it was a crazy thing to do, and a lot of people told me that before I started, and it was only once I began that I realized what they were talking about. No, I chose this because I think there's a certain fascination with physical endeavors. People are intrigued by that. I think once you throw in sharks, people get particularly intrigued. And as you and I well know, one of our dyslexic brothers, Steven Spielberg, filmed a pretty interesting little movie about sharks. So I thought that what I could do is I could capture people's attention. And then once I had that attention, I could utilize that platform to speak about the strength-based approach to dyslexia. And, you know, what was fascinating, Quinn, was that, yes, the swim was a big deal. It was not easy. It was challenging at times, but it turned out to be sort of a metaphor, if you would, to the individual's experience in traditional classroom as a dyslexic. Right? I had this Herculean task ahead of me I had all these changing elements, tides and currents and boats and potentially sharks. And the only way I was going to get through it was through perseverance, diligence, creative problem solving. And when I came up against something I couldn't figure out, I would reach out and ask for assistance from others. And so, you know, the journey really turned out to be sort of as if I relived my entire educational system. It was just a lot wetter and colder.
So, what advice would you give to a young person who might have dyslexia that's watching this right now?
It's a great question. You know, for the young dyslexic, like my 8-year-old son, there's one mantra and one mantra only. It's tough in the beginning. Reading, writing, it's a bear. But it is, you're eating the peas before your dessert, right? You are going through the hardest part of life in the very beginning. Is that fair? I don't know. It's not up to us, right? But when you can turn that corner, and once you got a relative mastery of those skills, the world becomes your oyster, because as you enter the real world, you realize that your dyslexia has a level of ingenuity and power that dwarfs the traditional mindset. And so I say this to my son day in and day out. Look, got to get into it. You've got to push through it. You've got to learn what you need to learn in order to get through school. And then it's gravy. Gravy. I'll say one last thing. I can't help but to ignore the irony of the fact that in school, the dyslexic is constantly being told how to fit inside the box. But you and I both know that the moment that you enter the real world, what's the thing you hear most often? Think outside the box. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of issues that, but at the very least, my words to the young dyslexic is, it is so worth it. Just stick with it.
So what's next for you and Noticeability?
So now I am building our first curriculum, which is focused on entrepreneurial innovators. This is actually one of those vocations that I mentioned that we find great success in. And so I've got a 23-person educational team, which is composed of people from Harvard University and Harvard Business School, as well as 12 dyslexic middle school students. And we're all working together to create the most innovative, robust, effective curriculum specifically tailored for dyslexic middle school students and embedded within an e-platform with a blended delivery. So there's exercises that are done in the classroom, but the idea is that this curriculum will then be able to be disseminated into public schools, private schools, after-school, youth-serving organization, and juvenile detention systems. So, as hard as swimming around Martha's Vineyard was, I'm realizing that building a curriculum is equally as challenging. But the beautiful thing is I've got a lot of very creative and enthusiastic minds working on this, and I dare say that we are going to change the way that dyslexics are engaged in the educational system.
Dean, thank you so much for being with us today. Please visit noticeability.org to learn more about the curriculum, Dean, and how you can get involved and donate. Dean, thank you so much.
Quinn, thank you, my friend.